Hello and welcome to The Common Thread. My name is James Kelly. I am the host, and today I have with me Josh Edelman. And we're going to be talking about Josh here in a minute, what he does, what he's invented. I'm going to ask you first about, you have something you want to share with us here. It's a puzzle, or actually it's a game.
Yes, sir.
You want to tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, sir. First, thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're welcome. You're so welcome.
The game in front of you, James, is Puerto Rican bingo.
Okay.
And it's a simple bingo game. 10 different boards, double-sided, with different pictures. And the pictures represent different icons or symbols from the island of Puerto Rico. And I created it because I have a passion for not only this game, but for the different cultures that I've grown up around. And Puerto Rico, having a lot of friends that are Puerto Rican, Dominican, I have a passion for the Latin culture. And I speak Spanish, I speak it daily. Majority of my friends are Latino. And so having played another similar version of bingo that was in Mexico, based on Mexico, I said, hey, let's do a version about Puerto Rico. That's a big demographic in our country. Puerto Ricans are the second largest Latino demographic. So I designed all these images, these pictures based on my experiences and my friends and their input about Puerto Rico. And so far it's been a pretty big success.
Well, I think we need to talk a little bit about who you are, because you are not a Hispanic.
Not at all.
You grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And it's kind of interesting, your passion for the Latin culture, or the Spanish culture, when you haven't even you haven't been to Puerto Rico yet.
I have not yet. Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that, because this is the common thread, and I want to talk about why do people try to separate things because of someone's nationality or their beliefs or whatever, and the reason why you are a good example of what we're talking about is that I know where you grew up, and I know how people frown upon people from other countries. And yet you didn't, and that's kind of unusual that you embraced a culture that you knew nothing about, and you're very passionate about it, because we also need to mention that you're a salsa dancer. So you've really embraced the culture.
Yes, sir.
And why do you think that is? Where did that come from?
I think it came from, so just a little background, where I grew up was a small town in Pennsylvania, like you said, but I was missing something. And while I love my family and I love the community I was around, I was more, I'm going to say socially isolated, but it was a colder environment. When I say colder, I mean socially colder. But when I came across some Latinos and started hanging out with them, I noticed how close they were as a family. They had family get-togethers, the large parties. They were very supportive of the family environment, and they had a strong culture, and they had strong traditions that they maintained, and I loved that. From the music, the food they cooked, the festivals they had, the help they offered each other amongst their family, I loved. And I said, this is a culture I want to embrace growing up, and eventually as a husband and father. This is what I want to see in myself.
So were you ever considered an outsider when you were with the Latin community?
Sometimes I was, but because I had such a passion, a lot of my friends, they welcomed me, and that's what I love. They welcomed me no matter what, and that got me. Now, to people who didn't understand my unique story, they're like, that's kind of weird. Why is he into this, or why is he different? So that was a challenge at times, but the Latinos that I hung out with, they loved having me, and I always appreciated that.
I just saw West Side Story, by the way.
Okay.
Which is also based
the new
upon
one on TV.
The new one with Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I have not seen that.
Incredible.
Okay.
But that's what the whole story is about.
Absolutely.
And I've seen the old one and the original, and then I saw this one. And I think that to get really what we're talking about today, it really is a good movie for people to go out there and see, to understand exactly what we're talking about today. And that it's not just like someone who's from your background or my background who rejects another nationality. Even other nationalities reject us. I'm fortunate as well, like you. When I lived in Atlanta, Georgia, I was there 12 years. My best friend was from Cuba.
Okay.
And so I learned about the Cuban culture because his mother did not speak English. And when we would all go down to Miami, a bunch of us would go down there, and she housed us and she cooked for us. And it was really a fantastic experience. I don't remember ever having one bad experience. I don't think anyone ever frowned upon us being there or anything like that. They welcomed us with open arms. So I think that's what you kind of have to do sometimes in life, is when you fear something or you think one way about someone or something, why don't you experience it? Because you're making a judgment before you know anything about the culture or the people or anything else. So I don't think that's right that we do that as human beings, that we're judging another culture when we know nothing about them.
Right. And you mentioned, how you really enjoyed the Cuban culture. Within the Latino, the Hispanic demographics, there's so many different cultures between countries.
Right.
And Cuban culture I love, and that's actually, when I speak Spanish, I speak with a more Cuban accent.
Okay.
Salsa dancing comes from Cuba, and so I have a big influence from the Cuban dance and music and overall culture. But there's so much that people don't understand or don't even know from other countries and cultures that we have ingrained in our country.
I think I shared with you that I had a friend who used to dance with Xavier Cugat, which you're too young to know who that is, and a lot of people my age would know who it is, though, because Xavier Cugat was one of the big band leaders of the time, and actually he was also a very famous artist. And Toby was Irish American, and blonde hair, blue eyed. And he hired her for she was the only white person hired for his dance group. And they did 5 motion pictures. She did 5 motion pictures with him. As a matter of fact, he hooked her up with her husband, who was Cuban.
Okay.
So Toby had an extraordinary life. And that was the first time I think I had an understanding, because I was very young. And that was the first time I probably saw the world through someone else's eyes in a different way. Because I thought, how could she do these Latin movies and dance like they would dance, because there's no way she could move that well. Well, I also shared with you how we used to go out to the clubs, and people would literally clear the dance floor for her, and she took over.
Yep.
It became a performance. I mean, so we often think, well, just because, this is Latin dancing and this is a white woman, she can't do it.
Right.
There again, that's ridiculous.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what her nationality is. It's the passion we have for something that matters. I mean, you can do anything you want if you have a passion for it.
Absolutely. And the same thing happens to me. A lot of people, they see me, I'm a white guy, there's no way he speaks Spanish, dances salsa, but once they get to know me, they're usually stunned. They're like, wow, this don't make any sense. And one thing I always do is not only embrace the culture, but represent it well, because I'm not Cuban, I'm not Puerto Rican, I'm 100% white. And I actually did the Ancestry.com, I got my DNA, I have no Spanish or Latin roots at all, nothing. But if anything, at least I'm going to represent it well and respect that culture through my actions and my passion.
Yeah. And I think that's true for what everyone needs to look at life. We were also talking about earlier on, I always recommend to people, you need to travel. I'm from a small town in Oklahoma. I grew up in both Missouri and Oklahoma, and my family, for the most part, have really never left that area. Particularly my brothers, they really don't understand. I shouldn't say that now. I mean, I think they're getting older, and my brother is married to an Hispanic woman. So I do think that as they've gotten older, they do understand more. I was different. I wanted to travel when I was younger, and I'm so glad I did, because I got to meet so many different cultures and understood the world. I honestly think that traveling is the best education in the world, because you get to see firsthand how someone really lives, what they're like, and you find out that we do have a lot in common. It's far more in common than differences. The way we feel, the way we think, the way we do things. And I think that's important. You're in the military, so you've had a lot of opportunity to travel. So I'm sure that's helped you a lot, see things differently.
Absolutely.
And how old were you when you joined the military?
I was 19, just turned 19 years old.
So when you took a passion for dancing, was that after you joined the military?
It was about 3 years in, 2.5, 3 years in at the Air Force Academy, when I went over to Panama for a language course, and I took a salsa class.
So that experience is what got you going with the...
Exactly. And so I had the passion for traveling and the Latin culture, but the salsa dancing was the icing on the cake in terms of combining all of my passions, the Latin culture, and then the connection with the people and understanding the diversity of... So salsa dancing, you have people from all over the world that come together at these different festivals, or just from traveling, because salsa dancing you can find in any city. And it's a language that everyone speaks. Even though you're not speaking, it's a language that you share.
Right.
Dancing, you're connecting with one another without saying words.
Dancing is like music. Music connects people. And in essence, what you're saying is the same thing. Dancing does the same thing. It can connect people.
And that's been the magic of my experience dancing so far, is connecting with people, even though we might not speak the same language or might not have the same culture. That intermix of culture diversity and the sharing of the passion for dances opened my mind completely and given me a new perspective.
And we know that from Dancing with the Stars. We see that, I don't think anyone thought that would ever be a hit show, and here it is, one of the top shows on television.
Absolutely.
So, dancing is I think entertainment in general, if it allows you to expand your horizons, I guess you could say, and take you to places you wouldn't go to otherwise. And like we were saying, travel is probably the best education there is. I've had some bad experiences in traveling, and then I constantly try and find look at it in a different perspective. I'll give you an example. I was in France, and I was in Paris, and it's a very tourist city, and I'm not saying something that's not well known. Overall, most of the French people aren't that fond of Americans. At least that's what we think. So I had some very bad experiences with the first few days I was there, and then I decided I'm gonna go away from the tourist area, because the tourist area was mainly young people. And so I decided to go out to a local deli that was off the beaten path. And there was a French couple who owned it. They were probably 30 years older than I am, or was at that time. And I was sharing them my experiences, some of the things that I was experiencing in Paris, and in the main tourist area. And they explained to me, that's the younger generation, because they think Americans are arrogant. They think that America, it takes credit for reclaiming Paris during World War II. And then they lived through this. So they said the people who live through this don't see you the same way as the younger generation. And the reason I bring that up is because it's through education we learn. And so whoever wrote these books or are teaching these children about how their city was saved and who did what and took credit for it, presented it in a way that was really propaganda. And we do that in America a lot with everything. Before I ever experienced Puerto Rico, I had my own perception of what Puerto Rico was like. And then when I went there, I realized this is a wonderful place. I want to go back. I helped someone write a book called My Journey with the Truth, who was from Lebanon. And because of the prejudices we see, or the propaganda we see on television about that culture and who they are, I had a preconceived notion of who this man was, that I was helping him write this book. And come to find out, we have a lot in common. First of all, he was a Maronite Christian, and it's got Beirut, Lebanon, has one of the largest bases for Christianity than any place in
the Middle East.
Yeah, the Middle East.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And he actually grew up Christian. But what was interesting is that even when he was growing up there, he couldn't, during their civil unrest, they had to pretend, they had Christian names, but they had to change their name because they would have been killed on the spot. So, and they were from Beirut. And so the thing is that my perception of it was torn cities blown up, but in reality, when he showed me where he lived, oh my God, it was beautiful. They lived on the Mediterranean. They had a condo that overlooked the Mediterranean. So our perception of what we think a country is like is what we see on television sometimes, or what other people may say without having ever experienced it. Now, in my case, I never have been to Beirut, but I certainly did experience it through this person who was from there and showed me pictures and explained what his father did and all that. And I think that's the problem, is we don't go out there and expand our horizons. We don't go out there and try and find, people who really are from certain places and what are they really like. It's easy to nitpick and pick someone apart. It's much easier to do that than it is to really find out about what that culture is about. And I think that's what we're guilty of in the society as a whole. Not just the United States, but all over the world. I think the world's that way. We all look at each other in a way that's really not fair.
You're spot on, and your story about Beirut is similar to mine. Before I went to Afghanistan, my perception was what I saw on TV and on social media. Just war-torn things, all over the place. But Kabul is a beautiful city. It's a modernized, at the time it was a beautiful city. And a lot of people didn't have that perception, didn't know that before they got there. And so getting to know some of the local Afghanis, they're similar, just like us in terms of,
and their culture is so rich in history.
It is. It's a beautiful. I said if there was no war in Afghanistan, it would be a top destination place. There's some beautiful places, the mountains, the snow. It's gorgeous, a gorgeous country.
And I think that's true even growing up. Before you hear about wars somewhere, like I remember Egypt, I'm so much into that culture. Same way with Russia. I grew up loving the history of Russia. And some of it was very tragic, but at the same time, it piqued my interest. And I think sometimes when we talk about some place, like we do Russia, you're talking about political figures who are making decisions for people who may not feel that way. I remember there was a time when I had a friend who used to go to Russia once a year, and he would stay with local people. And at that time, like I said, I was in Atlanta 12 years, so there's a lot of prejudice that can go on there.
Right.
But anyway, the thing is that I was at a church where they were talking about how they're all heathens in Russia because they don't believe in Jesus Christ. And first of all, I don't think that's fair. But in any case, then when I was telling my friend about that, he goes, "I'm there every year. What are you talking about? They don't go to the churches and worship. I think they're allowed to go 20 minutes or something." But he said at home they are always praying and they're doing. It's not like you think. They don't all have that communistic mentality. Yeah. So if you're not experiencing the culture, you really don't know anything about them. And I think that's what we need to do in society is expand our horizons. Go out there and see what's over on the other side. We can't just sit at home and make judgments based on television or sometimes even what you read in a book or in a newspaper article.
I got to go to Cuba in 2018.
Okay.
And I've always wanted to go. I wanted to see what it was really like because we hear about it, communism, socialism, all that. And I did see that, and it's unfortunate what's going on there. But I got to see a lot of beautiful aspects of Cuba, and that was the people. And that's what I loved, was how the people came together, how they enjoyed what they had, and how they connected with one another through dance or through their shared, sharing resources, whatever the case is. And that opened my perspective again to another culture and another country, given what they had.
I worked with a young man I used to work in one of the major hotels in Las Vegas, and I worked with a young man who he'd been working there for about 4 years at this time, and we made decent money. And he drove a nice car, had a nice place to live, and he always seemed sad. And so one day we went to lunch, and I asked him, I said, "So what's going on in your life?" And he said, "You know what, James, I don't really have a lot of friends in Las Vegas." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, I hang out with people, but they're really not my friends." And he said, "It feels like that in this country, everyone's competing. They're competing to who has the most expensive car, who has the best clothes to wear." And he said, "I thought I was very poor when I lived in Cuba." Because he said, "I didn't have any of this." But he said, "Sometimes I miss that." Because he says, we're not competing there. We're living and we're getting by and we're loving each other. And yeah, we don't have a lot of things, but it's different. He said the feeling and the caring and the love for each other is completely different than what you're experiencing here. And he says, maybe I'll get over all that, but he says, I kind of almost miss home. And I thought that's so sad because we've created a society here. We are privileged in the United States. We really are. And I appreciate everything I have. And I think everyone needs to learn to appreciate everything. Now, I'm not going to say I never was a person like that. When I was younger, I was ambitious. I had to have this and that. And, I thought I had to compete with everyone. But when you get older, you realize that's not what life is. It's about experiencing people. And I think if everyone threw that whole notion away of what someone's like and where they're from and just experience the people, we'd be a better world all the way around.
I love that story because it's exactly how I felt when I was in Cuba. And I was with a family that didn't have much at all. But we would sit on the porch and enjoy the music and dance, and that was peace. And it was absolute peace and enjoyment. And I would love to go back and experience that again. And yeah, absolutely, I agree with that story.
So I think that's why I wanted you on the show today, because I know your experience and I know what you've done. And the idea behind the show is to try and bring a commonality in all man. And I'm not a preacher, and I'm not out here to preach to anyone about it. All I'm saying is that I do ask people to have an open mind. When you meet someone because of their skin color or because of their nationality or where they're from or even their economic background, whether they're rich or they're poor, because we judge people when they're rich too. Mm-hmm. We don't just do it when they're poor. And I think sometimes we need to put yourself in their place. Like, you may have everything in the world, but it doesn't mean you're going to be happy.
Right.
Because money does not buy happiness. I think enough people have shared their stories on that. So that's what this whole show is about, is bringing commonality to all men. And I appreciate you being here today, Josh. Tell us, Josh, where we can learn more about your game.
Thank you, James. The game can be found on Amazon. If you type in Lotería Boricua, so Lotería is lottery in English, or in Spanish, excuse me. If you type in Puerto Rican Bingo, it should be one of the top ones that pop up. Puerto Rican Bingo or Lotería Boricua, one of those combinations, you should be able to find it. There's also a website, loteriaboricua.com. Or you can find me on social media, Salsa Josh. I'm known on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Find me, Salsa Josh. I'll be one of the first ones that pop up, probably the first one that pops up, and you can contact me through there.
All right. Well, Josh, thanks so much for being on the show today. Would you like to add anything before we go?
No, thank you, James, for everything. And like you said, the point you made about bringing people together and the commonality through salsa dancing, through my passion for Latin culture, I hope to do the same. And thank you for letting me share that message.
Thank you so much, Josh, for being on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.